Okay, so it should be recording now.
It's not notifying us. Normally it tells us that it's recording.
Has it
I
not done
think if
that?
you, Miss Paula, I think if you look up in your right corner, there should be a little red circle and it says meeting recording in progress if you hover your.
Okay, Carmen, I see it. Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Scarlett. Um, all right. Yeah, so record it, and then if it's needed, we can figure out how to share it after the meeting. So you should see my slideshow. Takes a moment here. Yeah, so I'm going to be updating you about the 25th Street and Monon sites. It's the cluster of 4 brownfield sites currently owned by the city, which were the focus of the 25th and Monon Vision Plan that was completed in the spring of this year. So just going from north to south, we have the former Bernard Binford site, which was a lumber yard, and it was a legal dumping ground for a while until the city took possession of the site and cleaned it up about 10 years ago. Then we have the 2 railroad properties. They were both railroad roundhouse sites. That's reflected in the name of Nickel Plate Roundhouse site. And then we have the largest site at about 14 acres. The Bulge is what it's called. So called because it bulges out from the trail. And then to the south of 25th Street, the smaller parcel, the former Colonial Bakery site. It was used for many years as a truck maintenance facility for the bakery, which was on the other side, the east side of that block of Winthrop Avenue. So those are the 4 sites. I'm going to be providing updates about the Colonial Bakery, and I'll have a quick update about the Bulge as well. For most of this, we talk about the focus of this is on the bakery. It's a smaller site. It has regulatory closure through IDEM. It's a brownfield, so we took it through Indiana Brownfields program, and it's kind of separate from the other sites. So we're trying to focus on getting that site offered for redevelopment first, and then we'll switch our focus once that's ongoing to the northern sites, the Bulge, Bernard Binford, and Nickel Plate. So most recently, this is an update from the last time we spoke. I had mentioned that we were waiting on a site status letter from the Indiana Brownfield program. That was under review at the time we last spoke, and that has been issued since that time. So it included an environmental restrictive covenant, which we were to record for the site, and we did. That environmental restrictive covenant has some land use restrictions that will inform further use and redevelopment of the site in the future. And this is just a summary of the land use restrictions that we were asked to record. First and foremost, and probably the most impactful, is that anywhere on the site that a single-family residence or a two-family residence, a duplex, would be developed, then soil between 2 and 8 feet deep would need to be remediated. So there are still some, even though there was a lot of remediation conducted a couple of years ago, which scraped off the top 2 feet of really contaminated soil on the property and replaced it with clean fill. There is soil that was unremediated, deeper than 2 feet. And so IDEM, they wanted to see any soil between 2 and 8 feet where there are contaminants still left in place that are at or exceeding the safe residential direct contact level as established by IDEM. they would like to see that soil be remediated in the event of a single family or two family residence being developed on the property. And that is similar to the restriction that is on the portion of the site that was historically also Colonial Bakery truck maintenance that is owned by Renew Indianapolis, which is to the north, adjacent to the city-owned portion of the site. So that is consistent with what we saw on the other part of the site, but it could affect redevelopment in the future because that would be a lot of cost for developers to potentially dig out or treat, that much soil for single-family residence or two-family. But other land use restrictions that were part of that environmental restrictive covenant, any disturbance of soils deeper than 2 feet there's one particular area of the site where there are some higher levels of lead still in soil. That requires a soil management plan be developed by an environmental consultant and then submitted for approval by the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, IDEM. And that area is not a big area on the site, and it's on the northernmost portion of the city-owned portion of the former Colonial Bakery site. But that is also something that will have to be adhered to by developers in their approach on the site. The next one, no interference with long-term groundwater monitoring. There's a network of groundwater monitoring wells on the property due to some groundwater contamination from 2 sites that are to the east of this site. There's been some treatment and monitoring of that groundwater contamination, which has migrated onto the Colonial Bakery site. And so if there is redevelopment of the property, developers will need to work with the environmental consultants who have those monitoring wells on the site and may need to reinstall those wells if development would damage or destroy them. So that's the third provision. The last land use restriction is that newly developed structures, because of the groundwater contamination, would require vapor mitigation systems be installed in those new structures to make sure that there is not an indoor air issue associated with that groundwater contamination in those new structures that will be developed. So those are the 4 land use restrictions which we recorded on the site, and that's the new development since we last spoke. So moving to the next slide.
Are you taking questions, Pierce? This is Anthony Burke. Are you taking questions?
Yeah.
Or are you just going through everything before you take questions?
Feel free to ask questions now, Mr. Burke.
Yeah, my question is, okay, what's the frequency of the monitoring of the wells, and are they monitoring for the lead only or for SVOCs or VOCs?
That's a great question. 2 great questions. It's quarterly monitoring by both the city's environmental consultant for one of the properties that we acquired through tax delinquency that had that groundwater contamination, as well as a privately owned site that's to the south of that city-owned site. So it's once every 3 months is the frequency of the monitoring. And they are primarily focusing on chlorinated solvents in groundwaters, so the VOCs, specifically trichloroethene TCE. That's the main contaminant of concern that's migrated off those 2 sites.
Okay, so the monitoring wells that are in place are site specific to the area that's been contaminated, right? That we know the contamination is coming from. So is there a plume underneath or not?
Yes, there is a plume.
Okay.
And the city has been treating, I can only speak for the city side of things. We've been treating that plume that migrated off that site that's just across the Monon Trail on Yandy Street. It was a former metal plating operation as well as several other
Okay.
historic uses. And so we've been treating that for the last 3 years, ongoing active remediation. And now we're in the post-remediation monitoring phase.
Okay. And so if any construction takes place on the site, the vapor monitoring will be inside the buildings or outside the buildings or outside the structures?
We're anticipating that there would be proactive vapor mitigation system installation in new structures on site. So it would most likely be a developer would proactively install a barrier or system, and then there may need to be some indoor air sampling after construction of the structure and the HVAC system is online to make sure that those barriers are working effectively.
Yes. And that will be the responsibility of whoever whoever owns and decides to build on the property, or will that responsibility go upon the people who already have the monitoring wells there in place?
That's another great question. And you anticipate a point that's later on in the presentation.
Okay.
So yeah, the city had a settlement with the responsible party for that site that we were involved with. And so we would fund installation of the mitigation systems as well as pay for any indoor subslab or ambient air testing that IDEM requires out of that settlement. So not
Okay.
the developer.
Okay, I'll leave it alone right now. Okay, thanks, Piers.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah, no problem. No problem. Good questions.
Let me ask you, Piers, this is Tony Knight. As a lay person, that other screen seemed to say that anything that disturbed more than 2 feet would have to have some kind of plan with IDEM. I guess just as a layperson, it seems to me like you couldn't build anything on there without going more than 2 feet deep. Am I correct? Or
that is accurate for if you're developing the single family or two family residences. That's what IDEM specified for that soil remediation for soils that are deeper than 2 feet. But if you were to develop I'll have some examples of housing that developers might propose. If you were to develop certain types of units that are, if they were condos or multifamily, if that was proposed by a developer, or potentially a row house where all the green space is under common ownership, and so there isn't like a single family homeowner putting a garden in, or putting an addition on the building, or putting in a pool or something, because that's the concern from IDEM, is you dig deeper than 2 feet. But if you had that type of development that was not that specified single family or two family, then you would not need to undertake that remediation of soils between 2 and 8 feet. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
sort of. I just don't see it. It seemed like anything you build would have to hold it up. You have to dig deep in the ground to hold the building in place. So maybe I'm just not understanding, but
Well,
that's all right.
there's
well,
also the
Pierce.
soil management
Yeah.
requirement. Soil management plan requirement. It needs to be submitted to IDEM for approval for that one specific area where there's high lead levels. They're still in place, but you'd have a soil management plan for the whole site. And IDEM is, I can't speak for them, but they would likely ask for details regarding going deeper than 2 feet for like utilities or that kind of information in the event of a site-wide redevelopment, which is what we're expecting.
Yeah, Pierce, and just to add to that, what they would do is they would just go and just remove 8 feet of the dirt and replace it. That's what they would do. They would recommend that be done. So you can go in, you just take 8 feet of the dirt away and then bring in new dirt that's uncontaminated. So that's what they would do in that particular case. Okay.
That's right.
And Pierce, if I can add in, so on average, most foundations are going to be going down within the Indianapolis and Indiana area. With most foundations, you're going to be going down about 36 inches, maybe 48 inches. So that, even within that, right, there's going to be some soil mitigation that needs to happen, which is what IDEM is already requiring. But with the concern, primarily with a single family home, is that individuals may want a basement. So the idea and the thought of a basement is automatically excluded from this if we're not doing all of the remediation of the total 8 feet of soil.
Yeah, thank you, Lorenzo. That's exactly right. And it would extend also to, a single family residence. And this is what our environmental consultant has told us is one of the IDEM concerns. If there's going to be, an accessory use on the property where there would be some sort of excavation that would go deeper than 2 feet. He brought up the example of a pool, but there's probably other examples too. That that's where this is coming from IDEM.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Good questions. So this slide is kind of a refresher for the 25th Street and Monon Vision Plan recommendation for specifically the former Colonial Bakery site. The consultant who assisted the city with that project, Green Street, they had included this language regarding key infill housing opportunity to stitch together the residential fabric of the community to describe, what the vision was for reuse of the Colonial Bakery site. So they're envisioning lower density housing, maybe 10 to 20 homes at most. And they will be composed of, for lower density housing, 1, 2, 3, or 4 unit residential. And they've provided some examples of what a 3 or 4 unit might look like. This is a 4 unit example, which Green Street touched upon. And then they also provided, I think this is quite close to the subject site, to the Colonial Bakery site. This is cheating a bit. It's actually 5 units. So just imagine one of these does not exist. But this is an example of like a potential 4 unit configuration for residential. And now, sort of where we are, now that we have regulatory closure on the site, the vision plan recommendation, of course, we have the neighborhood engagement piece. We have the feedback from everyone who participated in that process. We're at the point where we would like to offer the property for disposition and redevelopment. It would be a public offering through a request for proposals. And as a preliminary step, I mentioned that Renew Indianapolis owns about a third of the historic Colonial Bakery truck maintenance facility site. So the city owns a portion, which is about 0.9 acres, and Renew Indianapolis owns 0.3 acres approximately, piece of that site. They require different times, so they've remained separate. But what makes the most sense for us right now would be to consolidate ownership and then offer the site as a whole for redevelopment, for a cohesive project. So to that end, we've been meeting with Renew, discussing what it might look like for a land swap. And, it's still a work in progress, but we're moving towards a swap of potentially 3 residential parcels in the Martindale Hillside area to renew in return for their portion of the property, which is equivalent to about three 5,500 square foot residential parcels, which is like the standard lot size in the area. So it's, they have about 18,000 square feet of the site. So we'd be giving up about the equivalent then of three residential parcels. So kind of an even swap. And that would be that's the goal we're working with Renew right now. And then, assuming we can make that come to fruition, then we're looking at releasing that request for proposals in maybe the second week of January. So coming up here in a few weeks after the holidays, having the request for proposals published and out there for people to review and put together a response for about a month. And then receiving the proposals, having them publicly opened at a meeting of the Metropolitan Development Commission as required by statute, and then having a review by a committee to go through the proposals, meet with the developers if it's desired for questions, and to select a successful response, and then move forward with negotiations for terms on a project agreement, as well as the due diligence period for the selected developer. And a lot of what will be in the request for proposals would not be a surprise. We'd ask for alignment with the 25th Monon vision plan. We've included language regarding the existing environmental restrictive covenant, and how the city, because that settlement agreement would pay for the installation of the vapor mitigation systems in new structures, and we would also require the proposals submitted to the city for the site propose at least 51% of the units would be reserved for affordable type housing. So the majority of units would be affordable. And we'd also request that if there's going to be units proposed, like for multifamily, that there would be at least some family-size units of at least 3 bedrooms or more as part of that.
Piers,
Are there any questions? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, could you talk a little bit about what you've been thinking about in terms of a review committee and who would be part of that and what that process would look like at a high level?
Yeah, so the review committee has not been composed yet. We're trying to get that request for proposals out first, but it would include some city staff, and it would also include neighborhood stakeholders as well, heavy contingent of that, so we can get that perspective. And it may include maybe a couple of other entities, and of course, we couldn't include anyone who responded to the RFP as part of that. But yeah, that's what we're thinking, is there'd be a healthy dose of not just city staff, but also neighborhood stakeholders as part of that.
Here's this is Mrs. Gore. What are we looking for as a timeline?
So we would have the release next month in January, receive proposals later in February. The committee would meet to review the proposals, discuss their merits, and select one of the proposals in late February, we're thinking. And when that selection has been made, then we'd move forward with negotiating a project agreement between the city and the developer for timelines and to memorialize the type of development that's going to be constructed. And the developer would move forward with their due diligence, so like their phase 1 environmental site assessment, that would provide them with liability protections for contamination that's on the site already, and those sorts of steps. So realistically, we're thinking that a developer, we can't speak for them, but these post-selection steps are going to take some time, at least some months, and that construction season, is maybe winding down towards the latter part of the year. So again, we can't speak for what a developer might propose as a schedule, but likely seeing construction begin in early 2023.
Let me,
Ms. Gore? Sorry, Mrs. Gore.
Yeah, thank you. I just kind of wanted to know when we're looking forward to building and the finished product, basically.
Yeah,
let me
it's
ask,
what we anticipate. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
this is Tony Knight. Let me ask about how many of the units are going to be built already handicap accessible, i.e. with ramps instead of steps and with walk-in tubs instead of tubs people got to lift their legs over. And I know if that would cost developers more to do that, then even if we had to give up a little bit of the affordable housing, if that had to go down a little bit to get, I don't know, a fourth or a third of the units, just because Martindale Brightwood is an aging community, and it'd be nice if some of these new builds automatically would be senior and other able to accessible. And so in my mind, I'm thinking ramps and walk-in tubs are two of the main things. So I know that may be something new. I haven't heard that being done before, but just trying to be proactive since Martindale Brightwood's an aging community.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a really good point. I don't believe the RFP, as it's been drafted by me so far, includes language requesting that is specified by the respondents. But I will revisit the RFP to ask that be specified. And also, that is a priority of the neighborhood to have, if it's multifamily, to have at least some units be handicap accessible. So that's a really great point.
I think that's a great thing to include in the RFP as something that is important to the community in terms of age in place. We could say something to the effect of, here's from the planning process, from our engagement in the community, a priority of the community in terms of aging in place. Special consideration will be given to proposals that, have this component or incorporate units that are specifically for aging in place or for seniors for accessibility.
And that language is already in the 25th Monon vision plan, but we can reiterate that. We'd hope that every developer, reads from front to back the vision plan, but just to drive the point home, we can specify that in the request for proposal. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pierce, I have a question. Is there another project similar to this in the city that's been that has been done successfully? That is what you're proposing on this brownfield site. Is there another example that you could share with the listeners?
We have several examples of brownfield sites that have been turned into successfully redeveloped for residential purposes. And a couple off the top of my head. On the east side, near east side, there's a property that was former like rug cleaning operation that had significant soil and groundwater contamination that was developed into a senior housing facility. It's called the Oxford Apartments. A little bit different type of housing that we're proposing here, or that we might get proposals for here. It's not considering single family. that's a multi-unit. But that's an example of successful brownfields residential development. There's also a property on the west side, which was a former metal casting facility and foundry that's in the vicinity of Michigan Street and Holmes Avenue, I believe, or Street. And that was redeveloped into permanent supportive housing for disabled veterans. It's called Lincoln Apartments. In terms
The reason
of
why I
single
asked that,
family, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mr.
yeah,
Burke.
the reason why I was asking that so that it'll give them some idea how this type of construction has been successful. That's why I wanted you to share that with them, because people might want to drive by and take a look see at these places. Okay, so that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, and we're anticipating that the respondents who submit proposals as response to the RFP are likely going to be developers who have experience with brownfield redevelopment. I would be surprised if someone who didn't have experience with brownfield redevelopment submits a proposal for this site, though it might happen. So, you know, developers who submit proposals may already have the experience. And we've seen other examples, in this area of brownfields being redeveloped. The city may not necessarily have been involved, but we've seen certainly residential developments that have been proposed on brownfield sites in the neighborhood, so further south and further west. Like there was a site on 16th Street, East 16th Street. There was a former lumber yard and some other uses adjacent to the trail. It was developed into apartments just in the last couple of years.
Piers, this is Gina Lewis Alexander. Good afternoon. You just mentioned that there may be some preference for developers who have experience in brownfield development. In terms of the selection criteria, are there any other skill sets that you're looking for, or any area that you would weigh as critical in terms of who would be selected for the project?
That's a great question. The review criteria have not been put together yet, but yeah, I think certainly experience with affordable housing would be helpful. Experience with brownfield redevelopment, residential development. Off the top of my head, those would be some important criteria, or I'd imagine they would, for the review committee.
I have a
So,
question.
excuse me, one tag in to that, Paula. Would there be any preference or any extenuating circumstances giving credit to a minority developer?
It's an interesting idea. Yeah. We would need to, like I said, make sure we're thinking about all the sort of criteria used to review the proposals. But historically, we have certainly encouraged for any site that we're disposing of that XBEs, so minority, women-owned, disabled-owned, veteran-owned businesses, be included in the redevelopment of these sites. So, if that is something that is, a priority for the review committee, that would certainly align with what we historically push for redevelopment of these sites.
You good, Gina?
Yes, Paula, thank you.
I actually have two questions, Pierre. One question is this is rental housing, or has that been decided?
We're waiting to see what developers propose.
Okay.
It was not specified in the vision plan whether it be single or owner occupied, rental, condos, or some combination thereof. But with the affordability component, with potential constraints from the site like the environmental condition, we wanted to make sure that we left the door open for different types of proposals.
Okay. My other question is the settlement, has there been any consideration of using some of those funds for water filtration and air filtration systems, like making that mandatory for any of these buildings, especially the water? So like a carbon system or reverse osmosis that's installed.
So the settlement we got for
Huh?
that site on the settlement we got for that site on Yandy Street,
Mm-hmm.
it's very specific uses to address the contamination that was on that site and historically had migrated off the site. So we can absolutely use those funds to address the contamination that's migrated onto the Colonial Bakery site for the IDEM required vapor mitigation systems.
Mm-hmm.
But if there is, water filtration, and there's also restriction, which is, every environmental restrictive covenant contains restrictions on installation of potable wells. So it's not going to be well water; there will just be connection to the water utility. That might be outside what we could use those funds for, because it wouldn't necessarily be associated with contamination that's come off the site for which we got a settlement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank
Let
you.
me ask. This is
Welcome.
Tony Knight again. Paul, are you done?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask this, and again, I just bring up things that maybe not normally in the review packet, but is there a place for in the review packet something where say the developer gets some special points or something for their willingness to put something down on community engagement around for the existing homeowners surrounding the development? Because if we have a developer that's willing to say they're going to help the surrounding community, not just the development on that property, but say within a half-mile radius of it, and they're willing to set aside some funds for aging in place or to help with a development like this will will probably help to increase the surrounding values of those properties. And so an increase in property value, of course, will inadvertently raise the property taxes. So if a developer is willing to have a fund to help with aging in place in already pre-existing surrounding residents with aging in place and gentrification, displacement mitigation, if they're willing to do something like that, can that be part of the RFP review things? Just so if somebody does that, they can get some extra points.
Well, I think if a developer proposed that in their response, I can't speak for the review committee, but that would probably be looked upon favorably. Um, I think for neighborhood engagement, whatever developer is selected for acquiring and redeveloping the site, they're definitely going to be engaging the neighborhood, because not least because the site is still zoned industrial from the prior use as that truck facility. I think it's I-2. So, for successful residential redevelopment, a developer is going to have to apply for a rezoning of the site. And there would be, for that type of land use petition, there is a requirement that the landowner sends notice to all the neighborhood groups, all the various neighborhood groups, I believe property owners to a depth of at least 2 properties or a particular radius around the site. So, the Reagan Park neighborhood and other neighborhood groups that have registered for this area are definitely going to be kept apprised of that petition that will be forthcoming. And there would be plans and opportunities for input at that time as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Are there any more questions about Colonial Bakery before I move on to a quick update about the Bulge site? All right, seeing none. This is my second to last slide. So yeah, the Bulge site, as I mentioned, it's going to come after the Colonial Bakery site in terms of disposition, offering it for redevelopment. But in terms of what we're working on now, we're just conducting some title work for an Alta survey that we're getting for the property. If you've been on any of the city's mapping sites, you'll notice that the property, part of it is joined to the parcel that is the Monon Trail. So we want to break it off from the trail. The survey will let us do that without reparceling. And you'll also notice that there are quite a few parcels that make up the site right now. I think maybe 16 different parcels. But for offering the property for redevelopment, it would make sense to consolidate those parcels. And right now, those parcels have different owners of record. Not that they're not the city, but one tranche of those parcels, about a third of the parcels, or a third of the site, I should say, is Parks Department. They acquired those. And then the other 2/3 of the site is Indianapolis Metropolitan Development. So we do want to work with the Parks Department on that consolidation, as well as the future development of recreational space, which was a part of the 25th Monon vision plan to have a decent chunk of recreational space, park space, be developed as part of the redevelopment of the Bulge site. So to that end, we've been working with the Parks Department on a memorandum of understanding that memorializes such aspects as the acreage for parks, about 5 acres of park space is what Parks has deemed optimal for this area. There's also the potential connection along 28th Street to Frederick Douglass Park. That's included in this memorandum of understanding between DMD and Parks. And working with Parks when a developer is selected on the design of that park, and making sure that we're keeping them in the loop on any discussion about where those will be located, where the park will be located, if it makes sense for the park to be partly on the Bulge side and maybe partly on the Nickel Plate Roundhouse site, connections to the Monon Trail and the Nickel Plate rail line. Those are some of these details that we want to set in stone with Parks before we consolidate ownership of all the parcels under DMD for not just disposition of the property, but also IDEM is going to request that we consolidate the parcels as part of recording environmental restrictive covenant once we have that site status letter issued from IDEM for the site as part of regulatory closure. So we are
Piers,
working with. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I know the community has one request that we would hope that all the money that the city has invested into this cleanup or identification of what's all the money that's gone into it, that hopefully we won't end up with a bark park with the Parks Department. I think there should be some language in there stating that, there's no sense in, throwing city money in something that's going to become a bark park. Okay. So that doesn't make any sense to the tax-paying residents around there. I'm just saying.
No, that's good feedback. And the memorandum of understanding doesn't get that specific about what the recreational space will be. It's obviously it's going to be a conversation the parks is going to be having with the community. But there is a dog park option, but there is also other options like a playground that's included in there too. So it does not commit the city to just having a dog park. And we've been working with Parks Department on this. Most recently, we got a new Parks Director, so we wanted to get her feet wet, or let her get her feet wet, and just kind of the lay of the land before we re-engaged the Parks senior leadership about the memorandum of understanding. But she has that now, and we hope to have a meeting with her early next year about that.
Mrs. Gore, Mrs. Gunn, Tony, and Gina, hopefully you guys will have some input and Paula, some input on that to make sure that if it's going to be a recreational park, let's have it recreational for the residents instead of the animals.
We're with you. I missed her completely.
I can't hear you, broken up. Can you repeat that?
I said we're with you.
I agree with Anthony Burks. This is Jacqueline. I do agree with you.
Well, thank you for your feedback. Yeah, it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be sort of an ongoing project when a developer is selected for the bulge to, program it and design it. As you know, Creation City Park doesn't happen today, so it will be a process. Another point on this list I didn't touch on, we got an estimate for removal of the concrete that was on the roundhouse on the bulge site. All the structure above ground, as you know, was removed from that railroad roundhouse that was on the bulge site on the northern part of it. But there's a lot of concrete beneath the surface that was left in place. And so to inform, not just for our purposes or developers' purposes, but really sort of if there is an opportunity at some point to apply for grant funds or some other opportunity, we just wanted to know sort of what that might cost to remove that material, which is a likely impediment to redevelopment of the property. And so you might have seen Denny Excavating and our environmental consultant out on the site doing some test trenching a few months back in the summer. And we got the estimate of it could be anywhere from $200,000 to potentially $250,000. So it would be cheap, but now we have that information in case there is an opportunity to undertake that work and make the site that much more marketable for redevelopment in the future. And then one final point on here, approximate timeline for issuing a request for proposals for the site. We're anticipating it'll probably be late second quarter of next year or third quarter. So sort of late summer into the fall to put together the request for proposals and have that issued so that we can get responses from developers on acquisition redevelopment side.
Hey, Piers, this is Stephen Cox. I'm a resident. I was curious if, for a lot of the grants I've seen coming forward, a lot of them are focused on trails and accessibility. I was curious if it would be something to kind of split off the connection to 28th Street and kind of move up the timeline with that to correspond with a lot of the grants coming through right now. Just because we would be able to get, I think, actual funding for some of that. Yeah, so I'm wondering if it would be, because it looks like this is all being tackled as kind of one giant project, but if it's broken up into smaller sections that are easier to manage, might be something that would be kind of change your timelines.
Sure. I know that's on Parks' radar. They've been moving forward on maybe some of the land assembly for a connection along 28th Street towards Frederick Douglass Park. And for my department's part, we have put in it was included in the 25th Monon plan, that very northern portion of the Nickel Plate Roundhouse site is already kind of set aside for that purpose. So it's not necessarily in our wheelhouse beyond the property that DMD controls. It's something that primarily Parks has been working on. But I can certainly pass along, your thoughts to the park staff, and maybe see if we can get any updates from Parks on if their timeline has been accelerated due to the availability of grant funds.
Yeah, there's a man-made path currently that I've seen one guy in a motorized wheelchair consistently take, and it's a very small path, and it's not. I can't imagine him not getting stuck every now and then. So it is something that I think is needed. It's important to get that path in. Because it's, I've lived in this neighborhood for a bit now, and I never think to go to Frederick Douglass Park just because it's such a walk around to get there. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, this is really great feedback. Yeah, we hope, and DMD will work towards having that connection in as expeditious a fashion as it can be done.
Yeah, thank you. And if you can pass along my name. I'm part of the Monon Yard Association here, so.
Yes, Stephen, do you want to send me an email after this so I can pass along to my colleagues in the Parks Department?
Yes, yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you. All right, and that was my last slide. So thank you everyone for joining us, and happy holidays. We're right at 1:58. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but if there are any further questions, please feel free to provide them now, or you can always email me or call me.
I appreciate you having this meeting, this outreach. So thank you very much. I appreciate the DMD being proactive. Thank you very much.
Happy to do it.
Gina Lewis saying thank you as well. And Piers, I hope your family does well and as we go into the new year.
Thank you, Gina.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for joining today. I appreciate all the feedback, and I think it's going to make for a stronger RFP document for Colonial Bakery. So happy holidays, and we'll look forward to being in touch in the new year.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks so much for the
Thank
update
you.
and the presentation.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, all.